Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, A Roadmap for Enabling IT Modernization, sponsored by CenturyLink on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Dr. Carl Mathias, the Chief Information Officer for the Justice Department's U.S. Marshal Service, John Moses, the Director of the Governance and Enterprise Management Services Division at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Mitchell Thornbrew, the Acting Chief Information Officer at the Indian Health Service in the Department of Health and Human Services, and David Young, the Senior Vice President for Strategic Government for CenturyLink. In the very end of segment 2, Mitchell was kind enough to bring up security, which is a topic I'm sure we could spend the entire panel on, but we're just going to start with this segment. And one of the things is you talk about network modernization, when you talk about the move to software-defined networking, and when you talk about IT modernization, security is the one that kind of flows through it all. So let me start again on the end of the table with John, and maybe talk a little bit from a strategic perspective, since you get the title of governance and enterprise management. How is security playing into your IT modernization?
Sure, thanks for that. One thing to keep in mind is considering that the mission of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is the safe and secure use of radioactive materials in civilian use, cybersecurity is very, very fundamental to our mission. So there are a couple things that we've started to do in terms of how we execute and deliver cybersecurity in preparation for IT modernization and to expand and improve our network capabilities. So over the last several years, we've done a couple of things. First, we've streamlined the compliance process and procedures, shifting from an initial compliance process that was, let's say, on the more static side to a more iterative monitoring compliance approach. We've also continued to standardize and streamline our processes across cybersecurity capabilities. We've also taken the gauntlet of investing more in patch management system upgrades, enhanced monitoring, protection, and remediation capabilities. So we've improved that. We've also restructured how the agency reviews and addresses cybersecurity into a highly collaborative process. So this is within the last few years. So we actually restructured ourselves. For several years, we had daily cybersecurity meetings that kick off where the CISO, the CIO, the operations, and the governance side, we all get together based on standardized reports and standardized metrics that we look at our capabilities, threats, remediations, et cetera, and do that every day. In addition, we only consider FedRAMP approved cloud offerings for our cloud support. And also we've instituted the DHS CDM, or Continuous Diagnostic and Monitoring. We've implemented phase 1, we're well into phase 2. And then thanks to the CIO and the CISO and the rest of our leadership team, we've seen pretty dramatic improvements in results for our cybersecurity program. NRC's among the top 4 CFO Act agencies for cybersecurity under the President's Management Council FISMA ratings. GAO recently rated the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as fully compliant, which is the highest standard for cybersecurity across 5 metrics: detect, identify, protect, respond, recover. And we're one of a handful of agencies in that bailiwick. We've fully implemented the DMARC, which is secure email functionality, and we're closely working with DHS to monitor our external facing website. So we've seen results with that kind of collaborative shift and transition towards a more agile, active, dynamic approach.
And does this also tag back to, you went through a kind of a whole litany of kind of like compliance and stuff, but it also tags back to how you're approaching IT modernization. It also tags back to how you're approaching the network modernization piece too, that without these changes, the next step will be hopefully a little easier. I mean, it's cybersecurity. Is that the thought process, that
absolutely
you got to get this upfront stuff done?
So for instance, when we're planning to migrate to Office 365, we upgraded our network. We went to a direct connection. There are a lot of different aspects of that we upgraded and improved, both on the process side, on the hardware side, and the software side, to get us up and ready for 365, but also we're going to reuse those capabilities as we continue to roll out more cloud-based services, both for the mission and for the non-mission side.
And Carl, you have a very similar, cybersecurity is, if not priority 1, it's 1A. And at the same time, you have a different mission, obviously, than the NRC, and you have the whole mobility side. So maybe talk the cyber piece and how that kind of is playing into this IT modernization effort.
And yeah, it's similar to what John's describing. We build security considerations right up from the front. Even at the approval of a project, we're talking about what are the security implications, and it goes all the way through the process. For example, the warrant system, I've been talking about prisoner management system. There are actually 2 dedicated cybersecurity folks attached to that. As things are developed, they're in the loop on everything that happens. So, but when we look at the bigger picture, everything's about boundaries. Establishing your security boundaries and what you're going to do in there. So when you go to mobile solutions, it gets a little trickier because you've got your processing that may be happening in the cloud or on your data center, and now you're coming in through a mobile device, and that mobile device is just another vector for somebody to get in. And unfortunately, the crew we're dealing with are some of those cartels and other crime groups are well funded. They have recognized that investing in hackers is a good investment for them for both crime and for trying to get into us. So we take the eyes, for example, whether it's an iPhone or an Android or another device, we have to look and see how are we going to secure that. And so that has led us down a path where it's not one single product that does it, it's a combination of products we put on. And our customers, my internal customers, the deputies have had to get used to this idea that we tell them we're not watching you, we're watching your phone to see if there's unusual behavior. And that's been a cultural adjustment for them. When we call them up and say, get off that hot spot, it's been compromised, and or something like that. That's been a wake-up call for them. So that security, getting out to the very edge, has just been a real exercise. But then even when you come back into the cloud environment, as we move to the cloud, that's also been a learning experience for us, because just because a cloud service provider is FedRAMP certified, we've discovered you have to watch them and really read the reports on whether they're truly patching to the level that FISMA requires, that they're meeting all those FISMA requirements. And we've often found we have to get on their case about it. And then at the same time, never trust them, always encrypt everything, do your own security.
So Mitch rounded up here from the agency perspective. I'll move to Dave for maybe the vendor perspective, but very similar to I think what Carl is experiencing. You mentioned the endpoint, the concerns about security. How is Indian Health Service really kind of have that focus too for ID modernization?
Sure. So we're looking at software-defined networks and converging that infrastructure really has the potential to reduce our overhead of our current WAN MPLS technologies the same way hyper-converged tech infrastructure has improved our data center operations. So that same level of efficiency, being able to move quickly and get solutions out, being able to leverage FedRAMP certified solutions is an amazing resource that I think we all look to get a start on, but being mindful of our own infrastructure, even when you're using those approved or certified vendors and products. We're really focused on continuous diagnostic and monitoring and encryption. We deal very intimately with health information for our patients. And that's extremely important to protect, and you guys know that there's a huge black market opportunity for that, the value of that data, and we have a lot of that that we both store and move around our networks, and that's why we have to have that focus on security. But we're really focused on protecting that PHI, protected health information, making sure that the data is protected both in transit, but also dealing with data at rest at our locations, at our data centers, to make sure that information can't be compromised and that our patients can trust us to keep that very private health information secure and out of nefarious hands.
And David, tie this all together, really what we're talking about here is when you talk about the new style of IT modernization, when you talk about the need for network modernization and software-defined networking, all that is really, again, relates back to the security piece.
In short, Jason, I think when we begin to look at it, when we talk about a lifestyle, I think if we would look at the folks that have been living in security, they live a modernization lifestyle already. Nothing's at rest from an attack perspective. As soon as you figure out how to stop a bad guy, he figures out another way to get at it. So the lifestyle we're talking about, we could look at the security folks that have been living it for some time. It's an ideal place to look at. That's what's happening to all of IT. And it's not that it's under attack, but it's under evolution. And that's what security is. It's a constant evolution. I think when we look at security, there are four major groups that are very important to understand. Technology, and we heard the guys all talking about different types of technologies and where they're using technology. That's definitely one of the big food groups there. The next is people, behaviors. How are people behaving? How are they adapting to this technology world? We heard Dr. Mathias talk about the interaction with the field and how that's changed. The third would be operational. What are we doing to operationalize around the idea of security? And finally, and I think this is the one people kind of catch their breath after the third one, but the fourth one is partnerships. And so who do you trust? Who are you interacting with? Who can share information with you about what they are seeing, about what they are experiencing? So those are the four major food groups that I look at from a security standpoint and what gets really important. I think from a CenturyLink perspective, the thing that we can offer a lot of what's going on is if you think of a house, if you wait to let the bad guy in the front door, you're in trouble and you're using a lot of technology and a lot of people resources to solve for it. So what can we do from an internet service provider to let you know who's walking up to your front door? And I think the key, though, is the back door. Where is information leaving your network that we can help you understand that something's leaving your network and it's going to a known bad actor on the internet? How can we work together to get that solved and get that stopped and be able to solve that inside the house before it leaves the back door?
And I think David brings up a really interesting point about understanding the threats that you face. And let me just put Carl on the spot for a second. When you talk to the people in the field and your customers, and they understand the cyber threats, they understand the risks that they do face. I'm making an assumption here.
You're making an assumption there, yes.
Because you think with all the different issues that have gone on, whether it's Target or JP Morgan Chase or OPM or whomever, that people kind of get it. But I do get that feeling from other CIOs that there's still some work.
I think there's still education to be done. I liked when I was at DoD that, and I think they're still the same way there, is we're trying to educate users that every time you log on, you're stepping into a battlefield, whether you know it or not, and it's a shooting war. And I'm just saying in terms of hackers trying to get into systems and targeting people and phishing and spear phishing, we do our best to educate people on the threat, but you still run into problems.
And David, that's why having that partnership, and I think one of your key tenets here is so important, because I'm smart, you're smart, together we're smarter. And I think that's the concept that people
stronger together.
And then you can be reactive. Right. You can be less reactive and more predictive. And then also, you don't have to worry. Carl and John and Mitch don't have to worry about their people, the non-cyber people, understanding the cyber threat, because somebody else is kind of handling that side. And I think that's the future.
I still think you have to go through the education process. You have to constantly communicate with your workforce about what threat indicators are changing and what's coming at them. That's a constant communication. That's that people group in the food groups I was talking about. But having partners that understand once you've been compromised that it's happened and you identify that quickly. You can't leave the back door open and let a bunch of data leave for over periods of time, which is, I think, what some of the enterprise that you brought up happened to them. It was months of data leaking out the back.
Carl.
And I think key to this also is exercises to get your people used to the ideas. So, for example, DOJ does monthly phishing exercises to get people used to this is what you should be watching for.
All right, Mitch, jump in as well.
Sure. Just, this really got me thinking about some of our specific threats in that we need to share health information data in our industry. And some of the ways we do that, we develop these partnerships, and we have to be very stringent in the way that we communicate expectations to those partners, because we are sharing health information from our system to their system to benefit that patient, to give that physician, the high quality data they need to make the best possible, diagnosis or plan of care for that patient. And when we do that, we have to focus on data use agreements, but also the tools and the responses, and having that beyond just a legalistic, trusted relationship, but really knowing how to pick up the phone and tell them, we think you have a problem, or you think we have a problem, and how you work through that. And it can be very complex, and just highlights the need to really talk about partnerships when we talk about security.
And it's interesting because I started off the conversation IT modernization and EIS, Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions contract, and Mitch, you brought that up several times. I imagine you're waiting, you're chomping at the bit a little bit to kind of move out, because I think you see the potential of getting that managed security, being less kind of like worrisome. I mean, I guess you're always worrisome, but
Yeah.
you kind of make David do all the hard work in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And as some of the folks talked about, not having to have hardware and infrastructure on their site, it's tough to be a security expert. It's tough to be, up to speed on everything that's changing. It's evolving so quickly, and it really is nice to be able to outsource that to an extent to professionals. Keep obviously our in-house folks and mind our networks and our issues, but to be able to have vendors and really partners that can really help us stay on top of those threats as quickly as they're evolving.
David, as we kind of wrap up the panel here, we're just about out of time. Do you get a sense that the feeling that Mitch is kind of expressing about the potential other agencies are getting, or do they see a little bit of light at the end of the IT modernization tunnel?
Yeah, I think so. I think that one of the challenges and I'm going to introduce a new concept, and that's the procurement cycle.
We only got 30 seconds.
The procurement cycle, and that's, let me know what your outcome desire is. Try not to tell me how to do it. And that's what a real partnership is. And so let me bring the expertise from the marketplace to bear inside your enterprise. Try not to tell me how to do it. Tell me what you want to achieve.
We could talk all day about that. Unfortunately, though, we are out of time. This has been a fascinating discussion. I really appreciate everyone's time. You've been listening to the panel discussion, A Roadmap for Enabling IT Modernization, sponsored by CenturyLink on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. Let me thank my guests, Dr. Carl Mathias, the Chief Information Officer for the Justice Department's U.S. Marshal Service, John Moses, the Director of the Governance and Enterprise Management Services Division at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Mitchell Thornbrew, the Acting Chief Information Officer at the Indian Health Service in the Department of Health and Human Services, and David Young, the Senior Vice President for Strategic Government for CenturyLink. I'm Jason Miller, your host, and for more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search IT Roadmap.
On behalf of CenturyLink, thank you for joining us today. The archive session will be available shortly. If you qualified for continuing education credit, you will also receive an email with your training certificate. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.